You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Eric Coffin, hard rock analyst, and his website is hraadvisory.com. Right now, you're playing reporter for us from Toronto at the Prospectors Developers Association of Canada convention. What is the buzz around the convention this year, Eric?
I don't know how much buzz there is. Things are slower this year, which was obviously everyone's expectation. I don't see a lot of discovery stories that are necessarily generating a huge amount of buzz. I mean, Fission has some very good news. They're probably getting as much attention as anybody. Lucas Lundin is getting a fair amount of attention for the Lundin gold deal he just did to pick up Fruta del Norte in Ecuador. I think there's probably a reasonable amount of skepticism as to whether Ecuador is not going to play nice at the end of the day. But I think everybody's impressed by the chutzpah displayed in putting the deal together. And of course, it is a great deposit. It's just can they put a deal together that's going to work for everybody?
Why isn't there more buzz about other companies?
It's been a long bear market. I think it's just it's a bit on the quiet side. There aren't, I don't see a lot of obvious. I don't see a lot of obvious discovery stories. There's a couple that I follow. There's one in Turkey, but it's an AIM-listed company, so I don't think it's that well known over here. Although they are at the convention. There's some earlier stage stuff that looks interesting. It looks to me like some of the base metal guys are getting a bit of attention. Another story that has actually gotten a fair amount of attention in the last couple of days. Well, there's two of them really. One is Pure Gold, which is drilling in the Matson camp. Matson is basically an adjunct to the Red Lake camp. They delivered a couple of good holes yesterday morning. The other company that put news out just before the conference started and has generated a fair amount of interest as well as North Arrow Minerals, which is it's basically they're doing a bulk sample on a kimberlite up in the Northwest Territories, and they basically delivered the results of the first half of the bulk sample. So there's no value attached to it. It's just here's what we got, here's what the stones look like. It's generated some interest because it looks like they have a fair number of fancy yellow stones. Whether that's going to work, to be honest, is going to come down to them getting a big enough stone parcel, sending it to Antwerp and getting a per carat value, because it's not a high grade kimberlite. So in order to work, it's got to deliver a pretty high per carat value. But I think they generated a bit of buzz because it seems to have an unusually large number of yellow diamonds, which are found in a couple of other kimberlites worldwide, and they tend to actually command pretty high prices. So that kind of got some interest as well.
What about more mundane things like zinc or uranium?
There's a couple of zinc projects that look interesting, but they're not really news. The big uranium news was Fission made yet another new discovery at Patterson Lake South, a couple of 100 meters farther along the trend, where they've already generated 2 or 3 resources that have 100 million pounds inferred. I think a lot of the analysts actually upped their estimates of just how big Patterson Lake could be. I know a couple of mining analysts I talked to they're thinking in terms of 150 million pounds plus now, that's a very big uranium deposit. And they're very nice holes. And Fission, this is a company that's got 450 million shares out already, but they managed to get about a 10% run out of that on big volume. So that's, they definitely got people's attention. No doubt about it.
Are people taking a look at commodities now that crude oil prices have fallen so far?
Well, one conversation I've had with several mining analysts, one reason why a number of them are, I would actually say, more hopeful than they were a year ago, it's not so much, on the gold side, for instance, it's not so much because they necessarily think gold's going to go up $500 an ounce. It's because 3 years of cost cutting and now, $50 oil prices rather than 100. The expectation is a lot of the large and intermediate miners may actually put up fairly decent numbers this year, after 3 years of putting up pretty horrible ones, because they were all cost cutting and writing things off, and it was one huge loss after another. There's an expectation that the gold sector could actually generate some pretty decent earnings numbers this year, largely on the back of cost cutting more than anything else. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. I mean, if they can put up profit numbers to get the market interested, then fine. Whatever works, right?
So you're saying no real discussion about discoveries. Is that disappointing when you go to a convention like that?
Well, I mean, I went and looked at a few things that I think are interesting that are early stage. I mean, there isn't anything really big that's at that point where it's really big, really obvious, and it's growing really fast. There isn't like an Arequipa here or something like that. But there are a number of earlier stage stories. There's guys working on, they're doing their first drilling in northern Quebec where they went and basically did a bunch of prospecting and came up with a whole bunch of high-grade boulders, and they've flown airborne there. But they say themselves, these first 20 holes, half of these holes are just going to be trying to figure out what the rocks are because there isn't much outcrop. But it's a kind of, this is really a new thing, sort of thing that's gotten, they seem to have been getting some buzz. I looked at a new deal in Turkey that's being put together by the guys that founded Lithium, which had a successful discovery over in Eastern Europe. That looks kind of interesting, but again, that story won't actually be trading for a couple of weeks. But I suspect it's going to get some attention once it is. But there was no really, here's this big, gigantic, obvious discovery. The most impressive holes I've seen in the last couple of months was this other deal in Turkey, this AIM-listed company that I mentioned. But, the fact that they're AIM-listed, most people didn't know who they were. I mean, I know who they are. Brent Cook and I are both following it, but I suspect most of the retail guys walking around here had never heard of them before.
We'll have more with Eric Coffin right after this.
More and more people are looking to the internet for intelligent, riveting, and thought-provoking interviews. To advertise on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com, call 604-699-8600, 604-699-8600.
Welcome back. We're speaking to Eric Coffin. He's covering the PDAC for us in Toronto. Eric, last year we saw a lot of medical marijuana companies attending these resource conferences across the country. Are they back again?
I didn't see any of them. I mean, I wouldn't have been looking for them, but I didn't see any. I think PDAC, I think they're more, it is a mining show, so I think most of I think the powers that be at PDAC be a little bit tougher sell to get a boost based out of them, frankly, if you were a medical marijuana deal. I didn't see any here.
Or perhaps miners were so desperate last year, maybe that was the only hope they saw.
Well, and a bunch of those companies are still around, but I think maybe they just decided PDAC wasn't really the right audience, which it probably isn't. I mean, I don't think most of the guys at this conference would be terribly interested in that sort of deal.
Have you seen a lot of Europeans or Americans kind of lurking around, taking a look for some good deals in Canada because of the currency difference?
There are actually a lot of, there's a reasonable number of Americans. There are a lot of Europeans. There's definitely a lot of Europeans here. I mean, Tommy Humphreys and Keith Schaefer and I did our subscriber summit that we do the day before PDAC, and in that case, it's subscribers and invitees only, so we kind of know who's there. I mean, you have to register to get in, and there were a lot of guys from Europe actually, a lot of European fund managers. I think they are looking for bargains.
And of course, with so-called interesting times happening in Europe, they're maybe looking for somewhere where there's a little more geopolitical stability.
Yeah, and I think a lot of these guys, that they take it depends on the fund, but I think some of these fund managers, they take a slightly longer view of it. And, you could see they were looking for deals where companies that had acquired a large enough land holding in interesting geology that it wasn't going to be a one-hole wonder or one program wasn't going to kill it, where they could see sort of a plan. And those kind of guys are willing to, they're willing to come in with a 2 to 5 year time frame. And I think the expectation of all of those guys is metal prices and certainly gold prices are likely to be higher a year or two out. So, they're not that fussed about what's happening today or tomorrow on the gold market. They're looking for what they view as a growth story and a story that's got potential to generate news for, some time to come. there seemed to be a lot of interest from those, just from talking to those guys. That seemed to be what they were looking at. A lot of, there's always guys looking for, show me something that's going to have cash flow in 3 months. But there was also a reasonably large group of guys saying, we're looking for guys putting together packages where they've got multiple targets, and we know that they can go back 3 or 4 times and make the story look better. Okay. Maybe another promoter that had a heart attack. Nobody's getting beaten up. There's no fist fights this year. So unfortunately, no fun stuff like that to report, or at least I haven't heard about it.
Really? That happens?
In the past? Oh, yeah. It hasn't happened this year that I know of. Nobody's told me any good gossip.
Is there any buzz about uranium out there right now?
There is a lot of buzz around fission. Uranium, I think everyone's expectation is that the uranium price is going higher. But in terms of, earlier stage companies generating a lot of interest, we're at about $38, $39 a pound now. And the sort of the consensus I was getting talking to brokerage guys was they need to see 45 or 50 to really start writing checks again. But I do think you will see a few, there's a few stories like Fission and NextGen that I don't think are going to have any trouble raising money. Guys that are working in Canada and where funds can pull together flow through are probably an easier sell. But certainly the read that I was getting was guys were looking to see uranium get back to $45 before they were going to get excited again.
Is there any talk about Elon Musk's giant battery factory and its demand for materials?
I've seen it brought up, and I saw it in a few people's booths. I don't know what I think about Elon Musk, so I'm just like, yeah, okay, whatever. I mean, the lithium guys think it's wonderful, of course, because that's their the Gigafactory is what's, according to them, is what's going to generate all this demand for lithium and a couple of other things, which it may well do. So those guys are excited about it. I don't think it has much impact outside of, say, the lithium and maybe the graphite sectors.
But of course, you really do need those for batteries.
Oh yeah, no, I think the lithium guys are feeling a bit more comfortable than they were. I mean, I think if Musk actually pulls this off and this thing gets built and starts producing, it's going to be, it's going to be generating quite a bit of demand for this stuff. So that, a lot of the lithium guys certainly had it featured.
Anything that was surprising apart from the lack of fistfights?
I mean, honestly, I was a little bit surprised the attendance wasn't lighter, to tell you the truth. When I was here on Sunday, it looked like it was going to be a fairly light year, which is exactly what I was expecting. But yesterday and today, it's pretty heavy attendance. I mean, PDAC was sending me 22,000 attendance figures, which I was actually quite skeptical about on Sunday, but those numbers are probably right. I'd say if anything surprised me, it was that many people showed up. I wasn't surprised, and in my own contrarian way, I was somewhat comforted by the fact that there were actually a number of empty booth spaces, which is very unusual for PDAC. PDAC for many years, if you wanted to get a booth there, you'd fill out your application and send it to PDAC, and you might get a booth 3 years later. I mean, there was always a waiting list, and it was 2 or 3 years. Like, you would never get a booth first year. But this year, there were, I would say at least 50 empty booth spaces, which is quite unusual for the PDAC. But personally, I think that's a good sign. I think that's a sign of some cleansing that has to happen.
Well, people have called, the past year and a half, the years of acquisition and merger. Any of those kind of chats taking place?
Well, there wasn't anything new this week, but there's been several in the last month, and I think there is. I think there's an expectation that if the gold producers, for instance, if they do in fact put up good numbers this year because of all the cost cutting they've done, part of that cost cutting in many cases was to pretty much decimate their exploration arm and to really get rid of a lot of projects. I think you're going to probably see deals where small aggressive companies pick up secondary and tertiary deposits from majors that they're not going to be working on right away. But I also think you're probably going to see more M&A activity as we get later into the year, because if these guys do start putting up decent numbers, I mean, the cycle repeats itself, right? I mean, these guys cut back on everything. They get rid of their exploration arm, they drop properties, they start making money again, and then the analysts turn around and say, great, you're making money, what's your growth story? and they don't really have one, and then it's like, oh crap, we have to fill our pipeline, and they go out and start taking stuff over again. I mean, I've seen this movie before. I think we're going to see it again.
And the Oscar goes to?
I don't know who got the Oscar this year. I mean, certainly there was the guy that got the prospector, the mining man of the year, was the guy who runs Probe Resources, because of course they got a very nice takeover value taken over by Goldcorp a couple of weeks ago, and definitely I would say Lucas got a lot of buzz for his deal where he took over Fruta del Norte. That's got a lot of people interested. I mean, not surprisingly, people are a little skeptical. They want to see the deal and see that Ecuador is actually going to let them do business there. But it's the kind of gutsy move that the Lundins have done in the past that has worked out very well. So I mean, nobody bets against Lucas when it comes to this kind of stuff.
Eric, thanks a lot for reporting for us.
Thanks for having me on.
My guest has been Eric Coffin, Hard Rock analyst. His website, hraadvisory.com. You're listening to HowStreet.com radio. Check out our popular YouTube channel, Talk Digital Network. Find us on Twitter at Talk Digital Net. Comments or questions for the show can be sent to info@HowStreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com radio is a production of HowStreet Media Incorporated.